Hello, good evening. Hope everyone's doing well tonight. Those of you that are watching live right now, the couple of you that are on, just comment and confirm that our video and sound is working great. Tonight is kind of a special program. We're talking about the stocking of F1 bass in some local North Carolina lakes. And we have seen the video that Carolina All Out posted, the little teaser video of them dropping the fish out of the nets into the lake out at Jordan. So it's kind of been a long time coming. We've seen there was the external group, the NC for Bass or NC Bass Anglers. There was a private group where they were raising money. There's been a lot of traction behind getting this program started. Kevin Van Dam's foundation, I guess you would call it, his charity donated $5,000 towards this, if not more. But I did see, a publicly posted picture of the big little check that they presented. And there's been others. Chuck Murray, who is the president of NC BASS Nation, was the president, followed by two other gentlemen with good qualifications that have been kind of leading the effort for this. And so Seth, that we're all familiar with, had reached out to me and wanted to know, were we interested in doing a live stream about this? And I absolutely was, because I'm always interested in hearing what anyone from Wildlife Resource Commission has to say in any of their educational programs and things in any vehicle we can give them to reach out to the public. We're glad to do. So unfortunately, it does not look like Seth is going to be able to join us. He had to run to South Carolina unexpectedly, but we still do have Kelsey Roberts, and I'm going to bring Kelsey on to introduce herself and kind of give us her background. Good evening, Kelsey. How are you tonight?
Hey, everybody. I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm doing well. And I do see that there is another gentleman in the green room, David. Mm-hmm. How do you pronounce David's last name?
Belkowski.
Belkowski. Well, that's what I was going to say, but you never know. And I'm Polish. From the South, so I'll say weird things sometimes. So if you would, just go ahead and introduce yourself a little bit, and then we can bring David on, and he can speak.
Yeah. So I'm Kelsey Roberts. I used to be the District 5 biologist before Seth came around. And now I am the Piedmont Research Coordinator for fisheries. So I cover 3 different districts, all the way from Lake Gaston down to Lake Norman and up toward Winston-Salem. That's all kind of within my realm. And so I get to do these sort of regional projects. And so that's kind of how I got placed in charge of the F1 project, is because it's, this regional project that spans across all 3 districts. So, and David is one of the D3 district biologists. So he spends a lot of time out on Gaston. So if we have any Gaston specific questions, he said he could help out with that.
I'm going to bring him in really quickly. And good evening, David. How are you doing?
Hey, how's it going, guys?
Doing good. Glad to have you tonight.
Yeah, it's an exciting topic. We were out on Gaston this week, and it was really fun to see those fish get out there. I'm excited to hear what Kelsey has to say.
Well, Kelsey, you told me that you did a master's project that involved Jordan Lake. So what's your educational background? Like, where did you do your undergraduate and that kind of thing?
Yeah, so if you can't tell, I'm not from around here originally. I grew up in Michigan near Detroit. And so I went to Michigan State for my undergrad. And then I got a degree in fisheries and wildlife from Michigan State. And then I moved down here back in 2011, went to NC State, where I got my master's in fisheries and wildlife conservation. And my project was focusing on white bass habitat movement and habitat use and movement on Jordan Lake. So I spent a lot of time out there tracking white bass. You might have seen that project lasted about 3 years, and then as soon as I was done with that, I got hired on by the commission, and I've been kind of in this area ever since.
Well, you can't see it right now, but over this shoulder, you can see that it's red and white. But it's my NC State fan cave.
Oh
banner
yeah,
that's hanging up here, and my daughter is there now. So
it's a great school.
It is. It is. We don't like that light blue stuff around here very much. So. David, how about yourself? Where are you from, and just your general background?
Like Kelsey, I'm from a little bit further north. I'm from Northern Virginia. I did my undergrad in fisheries at Virginia Tech. Kind of traveled around, worked at Auburn a little bit, doing some fisheries stuff, and in Wyoming a little bit. And then ended up at UNC Wilmington doing my master's on invasive flathead and blue catfish, their feeding ecology, and distribution in the Cape Fear and Northeast Cape Fear rivers.
Okay. Well, they, I think we could probably have an entire episode, even though we're a bass fishing club, we could have an entire episode on the catfishing. One thing we do as part of our tournaments, we have a wild card prize. So during the tournament, whoever catches the longest non-bass species fish, which, a lot of times ends up being a cat. If we're at Harris, there's a good chance it'll end up being a bowfin.
I thought you were going to say common carp.
We haven't really had, I think we did have one carp turned in for that contest one time, but we don't snag them too much. But
yeah.
I was sight fishing 2 years ago. We were in a tournament at Harris, and I was trying to sight fish, and I could see fish moving in a flat way off. I was not close enough to them. They resembled bass, and I had to throw a bait over there at this fish several times. And when he bit it, I realized I made a mistake. And the measuring boards we use are 26 inches long. I pulled out a bowfin and had my fish grips in his mouth and held up the bowfin, held up the 26-inch measuring board next to him, and the fish was much longer than the board. Wow. I mean, it was a huge bowfin. But yeah, we have lots of times. I don't know what it is when the bass get in the mood to bite the bass baits. I'm sorry, the cats get in the mood to bite the bass baits, but it happens all the time. So, well, again, we're very excited to have you guys on. We're very excited to talk about this subject. Kelsey, I believe you want to start with your presentation?
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah. Go right ahead.
And I'll just plug it right now. If y'all ever want me to come back and talk about some white bass, I would love to do that. So
we catch a lot of them. We've got some guys that when they're not in our tournament, sometimes they target them. I shared with Kelsey before we came online out at Jordan. There's a little spot. If during the heat of the summer when we can't catch bass, we've got a little spot. It seems like we can always catch white bass, and sometimes the bass will start coming up through the white bass. I guess they stage underneath the white bass and come up from below. It seems like so. If we drop a rattle trap sometimes down through the white bass, we'll end up catching bass or catfish. Anyway, so. Down at the bottom, if you've got the screen button, and I'll adjust our windows based on the presentation once it pops up.
Okay, let me do my best to see if I can get this to work. All right.
Guys watching, as we're going through this, if you have any questions, just post them in the comments, and we will get to them.
Yeah, it's not letting me share my entire screen, and the window is not popping up for my PowerPoint slide.
Do you want to email it to me, and I can pull it up here, and you can just tell me?
There it goes.
Okay.
It popped up. We are good.
All right.
Okay, can you guys see that? I can't see anyone.
Yes, we can. See.
Okay.
I'm sorry. Yep, I see a picture of a small fish.
That's right. That's an F1 taken this week in Lake Gaston. All right. So I put together just a little informational PowerPoint, and at the end, feel free to ask me any questions. I'm really excited to be here talking to you guys. Seth has wonderful things to say about this group. So yeah, hopefully we'll get some good discussion afterward. So I think Seth has probably already talked about this with you guys a little bit, but there are 2 subspecies of largemouth bass in North Carolina. So the first one is the northern largemouth bass. Per its name, it thrives in cooler climates. So it's going to grow better in more northern states. And the Florida largemouth bass is native to more of the southern and southeastern states. So it thrives in warmer climates. And there's this, common theme, I think, among anglers and some biologists that Florida bass grow faster anywhere you put them. But the reality is that Florida bass really just do better in warmer climates. So if you were to take a Florida bass and put it in Michigan, where I'm from, it probably wouldn't do that well. Same as if you were to put me in Alaska, I probably wouldn't be thriving in Alaska. It's way too cold there. So really, the subspecies of largemouth bass will do best wherever it's native from. And so the great thing about North Carolina is that we are within the native range of both subspecies. So what that means is that most of our bass are just a genetic mix between the 2 subspecies. And what we've found through genetic testing is that along the coast, where we think the native population of Florida bass is where we find the most Florida genes. And as you go closer to the mountains where it gets colder, it's a little harder for the Florida bass to thrive out there. We see more northern genes, and that's probably naturally settled over time. And us here in the Piedmont, we're just kind of a hodgepodge of both. So some lakes have more Florida genes, some lakes have less, but it's typically around 50-50 or 40-60% in a lot of our Piedmont lakes. So this is important to, kind of explain what a large F1 largemouth bass is. So an F1 is a cross between a pure northern and a pure Florida bass. So like I mentioned before, North Carolina doesn't really have any natural or native, we don't have any populations that contain both pure northern and pure Florida. So these hybrids don't naturally occur in North Carolina. But we can produce them very easily in hatcheries through genetics. We know that we have a pure northern and a pure Florida. When we breed them, we get F1 hybrids. So when we put these hybrids into a lake, a lot of people think that they'll, reproduce and make more of these hybrids and that it's the self-sustaining population. But in reality, F1 hybrids can't make more F1 hybrids. So the reason for that is because the F1 hybrid is not a pure Florida or a pure northern largemouth bass. So as soon as it breeds with another fish, their offspring, even if they breed with a pure Florida or pure northern, their offspring is no longer going to be an F1 hybrid. So that's kind of why we have to continue stocking them year after year. As soon as we're done stocking them, there'll no longer be an F1 hybrid population. So why are we stocking them? F1s have become really popular especially in the southeastern states because of our genetics. So we don't really have pure Florida or pure northern populations. which is why we are able to stock F1s. And they've shown that under certain conditions in certain southern ponds, that these F1s actually outperform the native or the resident bass in those ponds. And what that means is they grow faster, they obtain a larger size overall, they're plumper, and so they just generally perform better. They have what people call hybrid vigor in those systems. But the problem is that hardly anywhere has really stocked them into large reservoir systems that are complex and have all these different variables that can affect how a largemouth bass grows, and evaluated how well they do, because it's really difficult to evaluate this small percentage of fish that we're stocking year after year to see if they are, to see if we can recreate what's happening in these small ponds. Do they outperform the resident bass? Do they grow faster? And so that's kind of one of our goals. Is this is a popular tool that's spreading across the Southeast. So we wanted to test it out for ourselves. But we're, doing it in a way that we can evaluate whether these F1s are truly increasing the quantity and quality of the trophy-sized largemouth bass in our reservoirs. So we actually initiated the program a couple of years ago, beginning with Lake Norman. And this was the first year that we started stocking Lake Gaston and Jordan Lake. And we'll be stocking these lakes for the next 5 to 6 years. We chose a stocking rate of 4 fish per acre, mostly because, if you go too high, there's really not that much more added benefit to stocking too much more than that. But we do have the ability to kind of fluctuate that stocking rate over time to see if there is an optimal stocking rate. This is just kind of what we chose to start with. And we're going to be evaluating these fish and monitoring these fish that we stock for the next 10 years. So basically what that entails is a lot of what we're already doing. So we're going to go out there and do our electrofishing surveys. We will, specifically survey where we've stocked F1s and then, kind of sites throughout the entire lake. And we'll be collecting, lengths and weights, age data, but we're also going to have to get genetic samples from each of the fish that we collect, because you can only tell if it's an F1 based on genetics. And in addition to all the electrofishing that we're going to be doing, we'll be attending some tournaments to just make sure we aren't missing any of the bigger fish through our electrofishing surveys. And what we're really interested in is seeing if the percentage of fish brought into these tournaments are F1s, and if that increases over time. So like if we go out in our electrofishing surveys and we're not finding, any F1s, it could be that we're just missing them. And so one way to kind of counteract that is to go to these tournaments and see if, they are turning up. And so, we might find that 50% of the tournament bass that are weighed in are F1s. And then the next year, maybe that's 55%. And then the next year, it keeps increasing. That would be a pretty good indicator that this stocking program is working. So those are the tools we're going to use to kind of evaluate what we're looking at. So I guess I kind of already talked about this, but one of the metrics we look at is relative abundance. So how many fish are we finding? What percentage of the fish that we're finding are F1s versus resident bass? If we go out there and sample for 10 years and we never find another F1, then that's probably a pretty good indication that the stocking program is not working in that particular lake. We can also look at their body conditions, so how big, how fat they are essentially, and compare that to the resident bass. Do they actually get larger? Do they grow faster? And basically, this is all just one giant experiment. So we don't we don't know what we're going to find. We're very hopeful that it will enhance the resident largemouth bass populations. But again, we don't know. So we're definitely very interested in evaluating this program before we expand it. So, or decide if we want to expand it. So a lot of people ask, like, when are you going to stock, my lake, or why don't we stock some other lakes? And the answer is that, eventually we might stock additional lakes, but for now we're just going to stick to these 3. And the future expansion of this program will depend on what we find through our surveys, because our hatcheries currently are not capable of producing F1s. We don't have the space. And so, it can be a costly program to basically import all of these fingerlings from an outside hatchery. So we definitely want to make sure that they're going to be successful before we invest a ton of money in it. And one of the ways that we're kind of testing, what future lakes we can stock these fish in is by stocking them in 3 separate lakes. So there was a reason behind the lakes that we picked. We wanted 3, relatively large lakes that were popular amongst anglers. But we also were looking at their nutrient loading. And so what that means is just basically how productive is each lake. And what we see is in Lake Norman, that's what's called an oligotrophic lake, which basically means it doesn't get a lot of nutrients and the water is really clear. So if you were to jump in, you can still see your feet. That usually means that lake has low nutrients, and therefore it can't support as large of a biomass as, say, a lake like Jordan Lake, which is considered eutrophic. If you jumped in, you might not even be able to see your hand under the water. And that's because of all the nutrients and the turbidity. But typically those lakes are very productive, so they can handle a lot of biomass. And then Lake Gaston is somewhere in between. So as you go from Lake Norman to Lake Gaston, Jordan Lake, you have increased nutrient loading and increased productivity. So we want to see how these bass respond to these different systems. So each one of these is going to have a different ecosystem because of their nutrient loading. And based on what we find, we might be able to see what variables are going to provide the best environment to stock these fish in. So we might have a better idea of what lakes to stock in the future. Okay, so I'm almost through. I just wanted to go through some common questions that we get and just clear up maybe some misconceptions that might be out there. So the first one that I get a lot, and we kind of touched on this earlier, is can F1s breed and can they produce more F1s? So yes, they can breed. They are just like every other bass in the lake. They're the same species as northern and Florida largemouth bass. All 3 of those are the same subspecies. However, like I said before, once they reproduce, their offspring are no longer considered F1s, and they won't have that hybrid vigor. So therefore, we'll be continuously stocking these F1s until we either expand the program or stop the program in the future. The second question is, will these fish impact the current largemouth bass populations? So the answer is we don't know for sure, but we do not expect them to have a negative impact on the resident largemouth bass. What we think could end up happening is some of the stocked fish might displace some of the resident fingerlings, resident largemouth bass fingerlings. And what that would look like is basically the population stays the same, but it's just made up of different individuals. Alternatively, it could result in more largemouth bass in the lake. But the good thing is that We're not really introducing any new genetics because all of our lakes consist of genetic mixes anyway. And we're closely monitoring these populations for the next 10 years. We'll be out there every year for the next 10 years. So if we do notice something start to go awry, we can, stop stocking or, reassess and kind of go from there. So we'll definitely be keeping a good eye on the resident largemouth bass populations. All right, this next one. Will F1s get rid of or hurt the Alabama bass population? So Alabama bass are what's commonly referred to as spotted bass. They are invasive, and as I'm sure most of you know, in the systems that they get into, the largemouth bass populations tank. So their abundance goes way down. We saw it happen at Norman. We're watching the change happen at Gaston right now. And the answer to this is just that no, we're not stocking these fish to control Alabama bass, to negatively impact them in any way. Our main goal is to enhance the largemouth bass population that's there. And what we're hoping is that these fish, since they're supposed to have hybrid vigor and grow faster and bigger, will be able to kind of outcompete some of these Alabama bass to be able to grow big again. So we don't see as many of those big trophy bass in Lake Norman and Gaston anymore, but we're hoping that through these stockings that these fish will be able to obtain that size again, outcompete the Alabama bass, and we'll start seeing some of those trophy bass, start to reappear in some of our systems. Or at least I know they're there, but just in more abundance, more of them. Okay, so some people who follow genetics, and I had this question myself when I first started this project and started looking into largemouth bass genetics. So why is a 50-50 Northern Florida largemouth bass not the same thing as an F1? So some of our lakes have fish out there that do contain 50% Northern and 50% Florida bass. But the difference is that an F1 refers to a first generation cross. So F is in first and first generation. So any resident fish that are that 50-50 mix are only that way because of decades of interbreeding and mixing. And so they're not a first generation cross. They don't have that hybrid vigor. And I could probably do a whole podcast on that, but it gets very complicated. So the main thing to just understand is that it's not a first generation cross. Only that first generation cross has the hybrid vigor. Okay, 2 more. How can I tell if I caught a stocked F1? So I know there are people out there who, say that they can tell the difference between a Florida and a Northern and an F1. That may be, but the only way to tell for sure is by using genetics. So that's why we have to take genetic samples from every fish that we collect over the next 10 years. Okay, lastly, do F1s occur in nature? So I kind of touched on this a little bit, but they don't occur in nature in North Carolina. This would require us to have a lake or a river that has basically a lot of individuals that are pure Florida and a lot of individuals that are pure Northern for them to produce those F1s. And we don't have any systems like that. So just to kind of dive into that a little deeper, this is the same graphic that I showed you before. So say this was a lake in North Carolina where it was, half pure to start, half pure Northern, half pure Florida, makes all these hybrids the first year, right? Okay, well then the second year, when they go to spawn, you have all these pure Northerns and pure Floridas, but now you have these hybrids and they're not pure. And so when they mix with either of those types of fish, they're going to create these other genetic mixes, which are not hybrids or pure Florida or pure northerns. And so then over time, let's say the next year, the spawning pool is now, includes these other genetic mixes. So over time, even if you did have a population that had a bunch of pure northern and pure Florida, over time, it would stabilize into what most of our lakes are now, which is just a genetic mix. It's just a genetic hybrid of pure Florida and pure northern. And you wouldn't have any, individuals that were 100% one or the other. So that's kind of why it doesn't really happen in nature very often. But there are some places that have, like some states that have a lot of pure northern bass, and they'll stock pure Florida bass to create some natural F1s. And that might work for a little bit, but it probably isn't like a long-term, it's not a good long-term solution, because eventually everything will just kind of even out. Okay, so we do have a website where you can view some of our publications and some videos and just some more information if you really want to get into some of the details of the stocking program. Or you can always reach out to me. That's my email there, and my phone number. I didn't include it, but I think it's on our website. So feel free to reach out to us. I'd much rather have people call me to clarify, any questions that they have, just to make sure we're, spreading the correct information and reaching everyone that we can. So I really appreciate it. And that's all I have for this PowerPoint. So if y'all have any questions.
So the funny thing is, I was writing down questions the entire time we were going.
Okay, good.
And then you've answered almost every one of them.
Oh.
I was thinking ahead and you've answered. So one that just came in from the internet is what is the approximate growth rate per year for an F1?
Yeah, so we don't know, because growth rates differ from lake to lake in general for largemouth bass. So, we won't really know that until we get some of our samples back. But in general, some of the other agencies are seeing them grow at a rate that's like 25% faster than the largemouth bass, the resident bass. So what that will equate to for each lake, I'm not sure yet.
So one thing I was wondering, so we've talked about, we're going to introduce the F1s. As soon as they breed, their offspring is already, let's say, dumbed down, right? Or diluted. The genetics are diluted at that point.
Yeah.
And I know, based on what we've talked about, we probably don't even know the answer, but I'm just wondering if there will continue to be any type of genetic benefit, a couple of years after we stop stocking them. Will we see their offspring be slightly larger than the current resident bass, or? That
I don't know, but largemouth bass can live to be, 16, 17, 18, 19 years. So these fish will remain in the system long after we're done, long after we're done stocking them. And, I don't really know that they've done much research on a second generation cross between an F1 and a fish that's out there, because what they look for is their heterozygosity, which for all you need to know is for an F1, it's 100%. So once they breed, that might go down, but I imagine it would still stay like pretty high for the second generation. But that's probably something that would need to be done like in a pond situation where it's more controllable and you're for sure going to get your hands on those fish again, to kind of see the growth rates. But yeah, I don't think that research has been done. So that's a good question.
One thing that I've seen, comments that I've seen on the internet from many places is Somebody said, I have a pond. I think they were volunteering to do some F1 research facility for you. But when we stock a lake like this, and out at Jordan, I guess we dropped in somewhere around 56,000. You put the number up there, but I had done a calculation based on 10 per hectare, and I came up with very close, within 1,000 of what you came up with of the 4 per acre. What do we think the survival rate is of the fingerling? So if we dump in that many, of course, some are going to get picked off by predators, but do we know kind of what the survival rate is?
That is a common question. I should have put that on there. So yeah, the survival rate from the stocking event. So let's say, they go in the water and within the next hour or two is usually very high. It's probably, between 90 and 95% of them will survive. What happens after that, we don't know. And it's very lake specific. It's very, they have there's a lot of predators. So I guarantee you that, they've done like survival estimates of fingerlings and found, it just varies so widely. They basically have to go through the gauntlet to survive and get to be age 1. But that is something that we'll kind of be able to glean from our data. We'll be able to tell like not a true survival estimate, but like a relative survival based on the percentages of F1s that we find in each site. So we're hopeful that the survival will be high, but I can't place a number on it.
And then one more I had, where did I lose it? Oh, so when you do genetic testing on a fish, how long? So let's say you guys go out and do electroshocking and you collect genetic samples, and I don't know how many you catch and shock during that, but or catch and test, but
typically like 400. We aim for 400.
And then how long does it take to do the genetic? I'm sure you're not doing some type of reagent test right on the boat. But I mean, yeah, so kind of, how does that genetic testing work and timelines and things like that? So the goal, and you're probably not going to like this answer, but the goal is that it takes like 6 to 8 months to get those results back. So it's not an immediate it's not an immediate response that we get. So I can imagine there's a lab somewhere that's just constantly doing these, because you're electroshocking all the time and you're doing different tests on different species, right? So,
and the labs that can do the specific panel that we're using are few. There's not a lot of them. There's
like Auburn, I think was one.
Auburn is where we currently send our samples to, but there's definitely some other labs out there that now have the ability to run this test. But for a while, it was just Auburn. And so now that's kind of expanded quite a bit, and we're kind of in this transition period right now with everybody kind of hopping on board the genetics train and wanting to stock F1s. Like, we're not the only agency that's doing this. So the demand has gone way up. So in a typical year, it takes like 6 months.
Wow.
But we're still waiting on our results from.
So when you take a sample from a fish, is it blood? Is it a scale? I mean, what is it that you collect from the fish?
It's just a little teeny tiny fin clip. We just use scissors and we cut their.
And then they're drawing DNA out of that, or okay.
Yeah, it's not any bigger than your pinky nail. It's probably like half of your pinky nail is all the material that we need.
Yeah, I was hoping maybe if you were going to say we do blood, I'm maybe come up with something.
Yeah,
because I've got experience with blood differentials, so I started thinking, okay, if we can do it with the blood sample, maybe we could. I'd have to convince a company to put some time into it, but
and maybe it could get turned around faster.
Yeah,
Yeah.
This particular company actually turned out a COVID test pretty quickly that didn't have to go out to a lab for COVID, right? It was like a 5-minute diagnosis for COVID.
Yeah.
It just
Well,
never came on because of the cost of the equipment. But
and that's the thing. I mean, like, when COVID first started, it took how long to get your results back, and now it's pretty instant. So that's kind of where we're at with some of this genetic stuff. Is it's evolving, more and more people are doing it, the technology is getting better, and hopefully as this project progresses, that time between when we send a sample in and get it back will shorten. Hopefully
waiting to see if any more. So one thing I thought that you mentioned, one thing that really kind of interested me when you talked about the 3 different kinds of lakes, you talked about the oligotrophic. Is that how you pronounce it?
Oligotrophic. Yep.
Oligotrophic. So, most of us in this area are used to fishing Piedmont lakes.
Mm-hmm.
And so when we go to, even as nearby as W. Carr Scott in North Wilkesboro, or some of the trails, fish Lake Hickory, what we call mountain lakes, and they're really clear.
Yeah.
Now I'm starting to connect that into my head a little bit, because some of those are rainwater and snow melt, coming from various mountains.
Mm-hmm.
They don't have a chance to pick up a lot of nutrients on the way to the lake, as opposed to Piedmont or river fed, right? And there's plenty of nutrients in these rivers. When they flooded Jordan, it was not uncommon to go out there and catch 100 bass in a day.
You probably could still do that today.
Unfortunately, a lot of people at that time didn't understand 5 fish limits, and
Mm-hmm.
things like, there were so many people caught. I remember a preacher we know got caught because the game warden came up and they had a bucket full of fish.
Yeah.
And the game warden said, "Are y'all having a good day?" And the fisher was like, "Yes, sir." He's like, "We got 3 5-gallon buckets full of fish in the truck." And the game warden felt bad for him, because he said, "I could write you a ticket for every single fish.
Yeah.
I'm gonna write you 1 ticket, because I really don't think you were intending to do anything wrong." And it was a preacher of all people, but that's just, over the years, there's been a lot of fish taken out. But, as we've talked with Seth too, catch and release has its own set of issues it brings up, because you're not taking into the population. The majority of anglers now are throwing the fish back, and
well, that's why a lot of the smaller lakes have stunted populations, because they just don't have as much pressure. But like with Jordan, it gets a lot of nutrients, and productivity and how much biomass a lake can contain starts from, the bottom up. So you have all these nutrients, and what likes all those nutrients is algae, and what likes all that algae is zooplankton, and, so on and so on. And so you have a lot more prey in a lake like Jordan, and that can support more, predators like bass.
Right. So as this project goes along, and I know nothing will get published at all for quite a while, but will periodic results get posted to that webpage that you shared?
Yes.
I mean,
yes. Yeah, we've been trying to make like a fact sheet every year. So as soon as we get results, we definitely want to relay those to the public, because y'all are the ones that we're doing this for. So we want to make sure that everyone stays informed. So as soon as we can get our ducks in a row, once we get our results back, we'll definitely try to post something, as often as we can once we get results back. And you can check that website. That's where we'll post the fact sheets.
So the website ncf1bass.org, which is the bass anglers from North Carolina lakes, how much influence did they have in getting this kicked off? That's an angler driven organization, right? Do you think did they, was it something that you guys had already thought of and then they got in behind you and it helped? Or do you think it was their original idea and then the state was able to come on board? Or how did one affect the other, basically?
Yeah, I mean, it started on Lake Norman with a small group of anglers that were pushing for it, and they were wanting to essentially stock them themselves, and so we were like, well, let us help, and we can stock more of them, and so we kind of partnered with them that first year, and then from there it just kind of garnered more attention, and I think Chuck reached out to us and. It just kind of grew from there. It's definitely been on our radar because, Virginia's been doing it for probably 5-6 years now. They've been stocking F1s in the Smith Mountain Lake and a few other lakes. So we've definitely known about it as a tool, but I think, as with anything, like we're a public agency. So when we get comments from the public and anglers who want us to do something, it's something that helps us to consider what we should be doing. So like if we have the resources and if it is a good idea and we can do it scientifically, then we're going to move forward with it. So yeah, we've been working together, and sorry, I was just reading that question. Yeah, anyone can donate to their website, and so I think I can share it in the chat, or if you want to share it later, we will be matching some of what they donate with federal funds, and potentially increasing our stocking rates in the future using their funds that they raise.
So I don't even know what the Texas ShareLunker program is.
Yeah, so the ShareLunker program is where they, I'm not super familiar with it, but they basically, whenever someone catches a really big bass, they will use that bass as brood stock to basically, genetically select for larger bass. And then, so they have like a whole stocking program based on these larger bass that people bring in.
Well, that would be why I don't know about it, because I don't catch large bass. Everybody online.
Yeah, it's a super popular program. I think it's partially funded by who is it partially funded by? It requires a lot of money. We'll just say that.
I just found their webpage. I shared the link in the chat.
Yeah.
ShareLunker, and Toyota is like a banner.
Toyota, that's what I was gonna say. Yeah. So, and they're partnering with Texas, and it requires a lot of money, and we just don't have that right now. We don't have the hatchery capacity to even grow these F1s. So,
when you buy a fishing license, this is what it funds. So, you think, I complain too sometimes, like, why should I have to buy a license to fish a natural resource? But when we look at the backstory of our fishing licenses, of our hunting licenses, it's, I'll buy a sportsman's license now every year, whether I don't fish or whether I don't hunt that year, because I know that the money's going to Raleigh, and the money is going to fund people like Kelsey, people like David, Seth, lots of other people that we don't see that work in the background, that fund, the genetic testing that we send down to Auburn. Just know that when we buy a fishing license or a hunting license, that's the only way that North Carolina wildlife is really getting money. Some people kicked me into the North Carolina anglers to help with this program, but there aren't a lot out there of people that just say, hey, I'm going to give money to the North Carolina Wildlife Resource Commission. But the other thing I'll say on that too is we all know, or most of us should know, that there is a huge Toyota plant coming in between Siler City and Greensboro. So on the route that I take to get to Lake McIntosh, had to change because the Toyota super site is there. And within the past 6 or 8 months, Toyota announced they are doubling that investment and the size of this Toyota plant that they're building. So Toyota is making a sizable investment to come to the state of North Carolina to employ a lot of people and we already see that they're very involved in fishing, right? We see them on the major fishing tours as a sponsor, giving tundras away to guys that win tournaments. We see them doing the Toyota Share Lunker. So hopefully after they get established, and we can show that we can put our ducks in a row, maybe we can get them investing in North Carolina fishing programs the same way they're investing in Texas and possibly other states. So it's all cyclical, you know, and it's all scratching each other's back. And somebody said, not if they don't start a North Carolina Share Lunker program. But, you know, who knows? You know, I'm hoping in 5 years we're going to be the Toyota CCKF. And we'll be giving away Tundras and Tacomas and Forerunners and whatever.
I'm in need of a truck.
I just don't want them to be all electric, but that's a whole different argument. So I do believe the plan, and I believe the plant going in between Chatham and Guilford is something to do with batteries.
It's right down the street from Seth's house. That's all I know.
Yeah. I just came through there today.
Yeah.
You know, just came up 421 to go up to get outdoors today. You know, the amount of construction, they're building overpasses over 421. It was amazing to see what it is now compared to when it first started rerouting me. Like when I first started going to McIntosh and I would get off on Julian Airport Road, it was, and by the way, if you drive that way, stop by Homeland Creamery and get a milkshake after one of our tournaments. It's the best thing that you'll ever put in your mouth after a fishing tournament. That cold ice cream, they churn it, they milk the cows right there on site. So
I have to get some ice cream now.
It's a neat little grassroots business that they've got going on.
Yeah.
And so I was just kind of waiting to see if anybody else would post. Alex said noted. I was waiting to see if anybody else would post any other questions. David, did you have anything to add or questions yourself?
No, I thought that was really good. I'm also excited to see how each lake shows out between the three. You know, nutrients is one thing. They all have different species compositions. You know, Gaston has stripers that are getting stocked at a really high rate each year. They have walleye that are stocked. There's obviously a massive blue catfish population there.
A lot of predators.
There's a lot of mouths to feed at Gaston. And, you know, Jordan is kind of like the largemouth king right now, producing tons of trophies. Norman's on the other end of that spectrum where it's kind of been, you know, trending downward. And so hopefully each lake will have its own benefits from this. But right now, we also have a lot of questions to see how it goes, because we really, like Kelsey said, there's a lot of variables that go into largemouth growth. It's not just, are they a lot of Florida? The genetics is cool to see, but it's on the forefront of fisheries science, and we don't have all the answers when it comes to it. And so we know that the bass at Gaston are intergrade somewhere between like 30 to 80% northern to Florida. They're completely mixed. They're all mutts. So it'll be interesting to see if those genetics do overpower some of the, you know, the growth potential that the wild fish have. So it'll be exciting to see and monitor these guys over the next 4 or 5 years.
Absolutely. And it's kind of comforting to hear that in North Carolina lakes, both species already exist, right? They're already mixed. It's comforting to hear that if you put a pure northern and a pure largemouth in the same body of water, there's a chance that they would mate already. You know, so it's not like GM. You know, it wouldn't be GMO, but it's not like we're not really playing God here. These fish would already mate together.
Yeah, it's not a new species.
Yeah, and we're doing now. One question I did have is where do you get the pures? Just to breed together. Where do you get the pures? Do you just find them? Do they just go out and find them in a lake and test them?
Yeah, that's a good question. So, well, for the stocking program, we don't do any of that. We get all our fish from American Sport Fish down in Alabama. So they have a brood stock of pure Florida and pure Northern, and then we, test the F1s that they send us to make sure that they're F1s. And then, for our genetic sampling that we've been doing, we just collect fish. We have no idea what kind of fish, what percentage they make up until we get the genetics back.
Right.
It was actually pretty surprising for us to find that Florida had almost some pure, populations of Florida bass. So
that is interesting.
We would not want to stock F1s or Northerns in that population because we would not want to mess with those genetics.
Yeah, you wouldn't want to lose those genetics.
Yeah.
So one of our users, and this is exactly the kind of question I think Seth likes. It's definitely the kind of question I like. Is someone's asked, what can we do as anglers to help with the stocking program?
Yeah. Well, so there's that website that people can, go ahead and donate to. Like I said, we're going to need to be stocking these fish indefinitely. So the cost of that's not going to decrease over time. Any funds that we can get for that is good. I would also just encourage people to reach out to their local biologists. So if you're, in District 5, North Central Piedmont, you reach out to Seth. You can reach out to David. His counterpart is Kirk. And then down in D6, we have Casey, Jobert, and Troy. And they can, provide you with information and updates as best you can. And the best thing you can do is just spread that information and just really help build awareness. Get Toyota to donate. That's another one. In the future, like we might have to get resourceful if this is a program that we want to keep around forever, because we will need a hatchery. We will need more resources to be able to continue the program long term.
Yeah, it would always be a cost because you have to get them from a hatchery. They're not going to occur naturally.
Yeah, and until we can do it in-house, it will be expensive. But once we can do it in-house, the cost will decrease drastically for sure. So, and another thing, I'm sure Seth always says this, but if you catch an Alabama bass or a spot, just keep it. Don't throw it back because they're the biggest enemy for largemouth bass right now. So.
I know it's not anything we've talked about. I always worry, not even with this program, but I always worry about snakeheads making their way. I mean, they're in Virginia.
Yeah.
I'm sure there's been some in North Carolina, but I sure would hate to see them invade our.
Yeah, and you guys are the eyes, on the ground that we go out to these lakes, a couple weeks every year. We're not out there, constantly like you guys are. So if you do see something new, like a snakehead or, any other new invasive species or, parasites or, whatever that's impacting, you think might be impacting these populations, like definitely reach out to us. I hope that this project is, kind of shows as an example of we are listening. We do want to work with our anglers. We do care about what you have to say. We might not have the resources or the time to do everything and make everyone happy, but we definitely care about what you guys have to say.
Yeah. There's a million different opinions out there. And I relate everything as to being a school superintendent.
Yeah.
So, if there's a threat of snow and you call off school and it doesn't snow, half the people are going to be mad at you.
Yeah.
And if you don't call off school and it does snow, the other half are going to be mad at you. So
the parents will be mad either way.
That's right. And same thing with any subject, right? So you start talking about introducing some sort of fish. There's plenty of people that don't want it. There's plenty of people that do, and you just got to do your best to balance it.
Yeah, I'm sure there's people who don't support this program out there, and we're going to do the best we can to make sure we've got a handle on it as we go through, and keeping an eye on everything and everyone.
We definitely appreciate what both of you are doing, what Seth does. We don't always like to see the law enforcement guys, but as far as you guys, the biologists and all that, we appreciate everything you guys do for the work that you put in. I know that you're not doing it for the money. You're very interested, in the subject matter that you're doing, and we appreciate it. And hopefully we can continue to push for cooperation between the state and the end users, whether that's anglers, hunters, whatever. We can continue to work together. It just makes it better for all of us. So
that's what we're here for.
Kevin, just chimed into great presentation and discussion. Very much thank you, Kelsey, because this was all your subject matter, and I just get to sit back and watch and ask questions.
I'm happy to talk about it.
Yeah, we appreciate your time, David. We appreciate your time. Like I said, these things get most of our traction is on rewatches. So it'll be on YouTube, and it's stored on Facebook for everyone to share it and rewatch it as they like. And again, thank both of you guys for being on tonight, and look forward to hopefully talking to you again in the future as we show some success with this. So.
Yeah, I'd love to come on and provide an update in a couple of years.
And I'll definitely hit you up about the white bass presentation, because I think that would be interesting too. We all catch them out there, whether we mean to or not. So
yeah, please do.
They're fun to catch via
kayak.
Yeah, we it's not a fish that we dedicate a lot of energy to, So it might be we'd be hearing a lot of new information and things that we didn't know. So
yeah, you might become a white bass angler. I don't know.
Well, again, thank you very much. Thanks for coming in right before a holiday weekend. Hope you guys have a great 4th, and look forward to talking to you again.
All right. Thank you. Bye, everyone.
So that's it, guys. Glad that you guys got on and watched. Glad that we can do something like this. We don't always have to, it doesn't always have to be tournament related. And in fact, I get really interested in this kind of stuff. I probably mentioned it before because I'm getting older and I repeat stuff, but I've worked with the Wildlife Resource Commission in some hunting programs and getting where we brought college students out to a dedicated piece of land and showed them everything there was about deer hunting, as far as tracking and different types of stands, all the way to the end of the day. We actually showed them how to clean and process the meat from a deer. So having this platform to be able to share what they're doing from the fishing side, I'm very happy about and glad to do it, and hope to continue to do it. There's a lot more of it out there. I recommend you guys checking out the Two Bald Biologist podcast. Very informative. There's lots of podcasts out there, so I'm definitely not trying to steal anybody else's thunder, but anything I can do to partner with, with our guys in Raleigh to help get their mission out, I will. With that, again, thanks everybody for watching. I hope you found it informative, and I will see you soon. The Raleigh Rumble's coming up 2 weeks from Saturday. So be sure to watch the internet and check out which lakes you can fish and the launch times, and just keep on top of that. Everybody have a good night. Have a good 4th. Tight lines.